colossal mountain loomed in the distance, its peak illuminated by a series of lightning strikes that cast eerie shadows across the landscape. In the midst of this tempest, a young man was revealed, bound and at the mercy of bizarre, otherworldly creatures. Among them stood a grotesque beast, brandishing a sword, its voice a chilling warning of divine retribution. It proclaimed that the next to face judgment would be a human who had dared to trespass upon the sacred territory of the Beast King. This young man, Tsuyosuke, had only moments ago been exploring a cave, now finding himself accused of interspecies treason. His face, slick with sweat, bore the marks of fear and despair, a reflection of the hopelessness that consumed him. The thought of execution loomed over him like a dark cloud, making the entire situation feel like a surreal nightmare. Earlier that day, Tsuyosuke had invited his friend to share a meal of noodles at the cleaner's base. His partner had cautioned him not to wander too far, as 2 other teams were still inside the cave. Curious about the influx of visitors to a C-rank cave, Tsuyosuke pressed for answers. His friend explained that cleaners were becoming increasingly common in these caves, not as heroes, but as scavengers and survivors of failed trials. As they enjoyed their meal, a signal was waved, announcing the arrival of the heroes. Realizing they needed to act quickly, Tsuyosuke gulped down his noodles, barely chewing. The C-rank heroes appeared unimpressed, unable to fathom the challenges of A or S-rank caves. Meanwhile, the cleaners buzzed with excitement at the sight of the legendary figures in shining armor. Everyone idolized the heroes, dreaming of the fame and fortune that awaited those who awakened their powers. Yet, those who failed the awakening test were relegated to the role of janitors. One of the cleaners, grateful to a heroine, inquired if they could finally commence the sweep. Tsuyosuke, having failed to become a hero, found himself reduced to the status of a mere janitor. After the heroes vanquished the Darklings, it would be the cleaners' task to gather the remnants left behind in the crumbling tunnels. There was a stark divide between the janitors and the celebrated warriors, 2 worlds that rarely intersected. Tsuyosuke had accepted this mission only after his dismal failure in the hero test. The cave itself was vast and dilapidated, typical of a C-rank site. After hours of searching, Tsuyosuke stumbled upon a fragment of a shield, a glimmer of unexpected hope. His friend had mentioned it could fetch a good price, and to Tsuyosuke, it felt like a blessing from his long-lost parents. Fueled by excitement, he resolved to delve deeper into the cave, convinced that treasures awaited him in the shadowy depths below. 3 hours into his digging, Tsuyosuke found it odd that he hadn't unearthed anything else of value. His partner assured him they were nearing the end of their search, but Tsuyosuke felt an insatiable urge to dig a little deeper. That small shield fragment wouldn't even cover a single day of little Karina's medical expenses. As he glanced around, his eyes fell upon a dry well, and a whiff of fortune seemed to waft from its depths. Intrigued by the well's presence in the cave, he decided to investigate further, dreaming of discovering something whole and intact that could fund a week's worth of Karina's medicine. As he peered into the well, he spotted a skull adorned with a ring on its finger. Without hesitation, he climbed down and began to dig frantically. To his astonishment, he unearthed a rare ring, one that could fetch a small fortune. He contemplated using it just a little before submitting it for official evaluation and classification. Slipping the brightly glowing ring onto his finger, he offered a silent thanks to his ancestors for such divine luck. However, almost immediately, he felt an unsettling discomfort on his skin, which he assumed was a reaction to the ring itself. Suddenly, a message materialized before him, declaring it to be the ring without limits and announcing that a gate would open. Confused, Tsuyosuke had no idea whose voice echoed in his mind or what was distorting reality around him. The world began to spin, and in a panic he screamed for help, desperate to understand what was happening. Outside, a few people recognized his voice but assumed he had merely changed locations. Tsuyosuke lost consciousness, only to awaken bound and surrounded by beastmen before a grand altar. The realization hit him. The divine punishment mentioned earlier was a massive bolt of lightning descending from the sky. Seated on a golden throne was the Beast King, observing the scene with an imposing demeanor. An officer beside him announced the execution of 3 criminals accused of severe interspecies treason. The first was one of their own, accused of selling information to humans and elves. They hurled him onto the altar, declaring that by royal decree, he would face divine judgment without mercy. With a brutal kick, they sent the traitor into the center of the altar, where lightning struck him with ferocious intensity. The beastman roared in excitement as his body convulsed under the electric onslaught. Then, they turned their attention to Tsuyosuke, the human who had dared to violate their sacred land. They tossed him onto the altar, and despite his frantic cries of misunderstanding, no one was willing to listen. The great Beast King seized him, tossing him back and forth like a rag doll. In that horrific moment, two thoughts consumed Tsuyosuke's mind: Karina and his dream of becoming a hero. The wild crowd clamored for more punishment, reveling in the human's suffering on the cursed altar. Just before the lightning struck, Tsuyosuke managed to move with great difficulty, narrowly dodging the first bolt. The guards overseeing the execution grew irritated. Nothing like this had ever happened before. The next victim was a brown-haired girl who watched the chaos unfold in complete silence. The general saw Tsuyosuke's evasion as a provocation, an unprecedented feat in this ancestral ceremony. The Beast King merely observed, curiosity flickering in his eyes, but he made no move to intervene. Tsuyosuke, despite his frail body, refused to accept such a pathetic end in this bizarre place. But then, the second bolt struck him directly, and in that moment, everyone believed it was truly the end. The general smiled with satisfaction, convinced that the second lightning bolt had sealed the human's fate. They were already preparing the girl for punishment, hardly bothering to check if Tsuyosuke was truly gone. But the ring on his finger glowed brightly, and he mumbled to himself that it couldn't end like this. As the activation sequence began, the system initiated authentication, followed by a remarkable bodily repair of this unlikely user. The Beast King began to notice that life still flickered within the nearly charred human's body. Even the general realized with growing unease that Tsuyosuke was still breathing as more bolts of lightning struck him in rapid succession. The system notified that physical reconstruction had reached 15% and was progressing rapidly. The beasts grew restless at the delay in punishment. It seemed the lightning was not destroying him but instead fortifying him. With each new strike, Tsuyosuke appeared to become more resilient. At 40% completion, the system activated a skill called Divine Eye. Bound to the bearer, Tsuyosuke rose with great effort, drawn toward a large axe surrounded by mystical lightning on the altar, an almost hypnotic pull guiding him. The spectators, confused, watched in disbelief as someone once deemed disposable began to transform. At 60% physical reconstruction, he mysteriously acquired another skill: Inventory of Divine Consciousness. The general could hardly believe that anyone, let alone a mere human, could endure such judgment for so long. The crowd was astonished to see Tsuyosuke approach the divine hammer, an act considered impossible for ordinary mortals. He felt the hammer calling to him, though he couldn't fully grasp the reason behind this connection. When reconstruction hit 100%, the system selected a special status, allowing him to lift the hammer. With newfound strength, Tsuyosuke raised the Divine King's hammer before the stunned beastman. Shock rippled through the crowd. No one had expected a so-called criminal to wield such power. As he lifted the hammer above his head, it began to change shape, no longer radiating overwhelming energy, but transforming into something he could wield. The Beast Girl watched in astonishment, unable to comprehend the unfolding events. The Beast General, furious at the audacity of this human, couldn't accept that things might end this way. If his thoughts had been audible, they would have echoed with disbelief. He was enraged, convinced that not even the king of the beast folk could have lifted the hammer. Feeling a surge of strength, Tsuyosuke paused to check his status window, meticulously studying his new attributes. Suddenly, as he analyzed the system's stats, an attacker lunged at him, trying to catch him off guard. The beastman shouted, demanding to know how Tsuyosuke dared to touch such a precious artifact with his filthy hands. The entire army erupted in joy, knowing the general was the strongest, and they expected a swift resolution. The beastman couldn't comprehend how Tsuyosuke had avoided divine punishment, but now he demanded the artifact be returned before it could channel its power back. The status screen quickly displayed a new passive skill for Tsuyosuke called Divine Eye. He now understood that it allowed him to read his opponent, their weapons, and their skills. The one before him was the general, level 84, wielding extremely powerful weapons. With the general standing before him, Tsuyosuke realized how his passive ability worked, seeing everything through the lens of the divine eye. The general shouted, demanding to know how a lowly human dared defy the will of the great beast folk. Just as the opponent prepared to strike, Tsuyosuke dodged with surprising agility, calling out that there must be a misunderstanding. As Tsuyosuke faced the formidable general, he knew he could never defeat a level 84 orc. He hoped his words would clarify the misunderstanding, but before he could receive a response, the orc lunged at him again, ignoring his pleas. The beast girl watched with a mix of concern and dread. Tsuyosuke's fate seemed grim, especially since General Hauga was one of the 5 most powerful generals among the beast folk. Everyone knew of Hauga's incredible strength. Suddenly, a massive column of smoke, dust, and raw magical energy erupted from the altar as the orc's attacks rained down on Tsuyosuke. Sparks flew with each strike, but with the divine hammer in hand, Tsuyosuke managed to endure, holding the weapon firmly. The general frowned, astonished that this human had managed to block his powerful blows. Yet, Hauga attributed this unexpected resilience to the divine hammer itself, remaining calm in the face of the unfolding chaos. Tsuyosuke continued to try to soothe the furious orc, insisting that it was all just a misunderstanding. But the general, unwilling to listen to a human, attacked with blinding speed. In a swift motion, he grabbed Tsuyosuke by the neck and lifted him high above his head, intent on crushing him. Just then, a status window appeared before Tsuyosuke, granting him the ability to activate another passive skill, the power to copy any enemy ability. With little time to waste, he knew he had to act quickly. He pressed his fingers against the orc's chest, just as he was being lifted. Confused and dazed, General Hauga groaned, assuming a strange posture as Tsuyosuke delved into the orc's consciousness, sifting through a vast array of abilities. He had mere seconds to decide which power to choose, and the options before him were both diverse and formidable. Meanwhile, Hauga, in a panic, demanded to know what the protagonist was doing, bewildered by the strange action unfolding before him. In the next moment, Tsuyosuke launched himself from the ground, channeling one of the general's strongest attacks. Their blows collided, each one blocking the other, leaving the orc utterly stunned. A wave of concentrated magical energy surged forth, striking the orc with incredible force. The crowd of orcs near the altar gasped in shock, impressed by the display of power. However, to Tsuyosuke's dismay, the mighty blow turned out to be completely painless. Lacking the proficiency and the correct weapon, he had failed to inflict any damage. This realization left him stunned. The move had been absurdly powerful, yet ineffective. Both he and the general were momentarily at a loss, unsure of how to proceed. After a brief pause, General Hauga picked up his sword and charged at Tsuyosuke once more, shouting in fury about how a filthy human dared to attack him. Suddenly, against the backdrop of a blood-red moon, the king of the beast folk rose and commanded the fight to stop. The entire crowd fell silent, stunned by the presence of their king. A shockwave emanated from the beast king, and Tsuyosuke instinctively shielded his eyes, bracing himself against the force. As the dust settled, he beheld the imposing figure of the king of the beast folk. To his astonishment, the king knelt and bowed his head before Tsuyosuke, causing terror to ripple through his subordinates. The unexpected display of respect left everyone, including Tsuyosuke, in a state of disbelief. Then the Beast King proclaimed that the divine axe had chosen Tsuyosuke. Rising to his feet, he placed both hands on Tsuyosuke's shoulders and declared that the gods had sent a sign from the heavens. Tsuyosuke was the first in hundreds of years to be chosen by the hammer, and the fact that he was human made the situation all the more extraordinary, as the rulers of the beast folk had always been beasts. A hush fell over the crowd as the king continued, stating that no one in centuries had forged a divine vessel except for this man. Tsuyosuke was destined to be the future ruler of the beast people, and all should allow him the opportunity to grow. As the king finished speaking, murmurs of doubt rippled through the crowd, questioning the king's decisions. The general, still skeptical, attempted to persuade his master, insisting that Tsuyosuke was merely a man. The king, unfazed, replied that the prophecy was not open for debate. Hearing this, the orc knelt in agreement, recognizing that the prophecy did not specify whether the chosen one would be beast or human. Curious about Tsuyosuke's name, the royal attendant asked him to introduce himself. Upon receiving the answer, the attendant remarked that Tsuyosuke was still far too weak to become king of an entire nation. He suggested that in 1 year, Tsuyosuke should grow stronger and return to the land of the beast folk, at which point all would see if he was worthy. The king then placed a spell upon Tsuyosuke's head, explaining that it was necessary for his return in a year. If he failed to return, the king would use the mark to find and eliminate him. Just as the king finished applying the mark, a cry erupted from the crowd. Someone shouted in agreement with great fervor. It was the beast girl, the one who had been slated for execution after Tsuyosuke. He recognized her from earlier and, using his divine eye, assessed her traits. To his astonishment, he discovered she was level 72, far stronger than he had anticipated. Confused as to why she was to be executed, he raised his hand and waved in her direction, expressing his gratitude. He acknowledged her point, stating that he too had seen this incredible opportunity. Turning to the king, he agreed with the proposal, but added one condition. The beast girl would accompany him. The crowd gasped. No one could believe that after being pardoned, Tsuyosuke still dared to make demands. Undeterred, he pointed toward the girl, who could hardly believe she had been chosen. He wanted to ensure their safety, feeling he owed her nothing more. Later that night, at a campsite under the cover of darkness, Tsuyosuke stood at the gate, waiting for his new companion to arrive. As he reflected on the whirlwind of events, his thoughts drifted to the Ring of Infinity. Suddenly, a pleasant voice broke through his reverie, prompting him to turn. He was met with the sight of the beast girl, now transformed in different clothes, barely recognizable. A rush of emotions filled Tsuyosuke as he gazed at the beautiful young woman before him. Blushing slightly and trying to hide his feelings, he stammered that it was nothing, merely a return of the help he had received. Her cheeks flushed in response, and she expressed how much his words meant to her. Holding his hands, she revealed that no one had ever protected her the way he had. He had given her a second chance and even allowed her to call him Master. Feeling a bit bashful, she declared that he had become a true miracle in her life, and now she was ready to repay him. As she drew closer, holding his hands, Tsuyosuke felt his face heat up, struggling to maintain his composure. She eventually let go, turning to stand under the moonlight, and playfully remarked that it was a bit dark now. With a teasing smile, she advised him to be careful while walking on dark roads. Tsuyosuke tried to regain his composure after everything that had transpired, taking deep breaths to steady himself. He remarked to the beast girl that they were now in a wonderful new world. However, as soon as the words left his mouth, reality hit him like a cold wave. He wasn't in his own world anymore. He remembered entering this realm through an endless portal that had activated when he interacted with the ring. A thought crossed his mind. What if falling into that portal again could bring him back? At that moment, the ring on his finger began to glow, and it felt as if it had opened a passage. Excitement surged through him, but uncertainty lingered. Just as the ring started to pull him in, he felt a rush of happiness, and in the blink of an eye, he vanished. The sensation of being transported was jarring, and he braced himself for the discomfort that accompanied the transfer. A second later, he found himself back at the well from which he had climbed to retrieve the ring. Eager to assess his situation, Tsuyosuke revealed his traits and was overjoyed to discover that his abilities had remained intact. He realized that if his level from the other world had been preserved, then his stats must have synchronized during the transition. Peering into the well, he saw his companions looking down, reacting to his last shout. They had come to check on him, calling out to see if he was all right. Clueless about how much time had passed, he figured they had been waiting for a long while. His friend expressed relief that he was okay, having assumed Tsuyosuke had just been sitting in the well the entire time. It dawned on Tsuyosuke that while he had been in the other world, time in his home world had seemingly stopped. The events he had experienced there felt eerily similar to the plot of a manga he had once read. He wondered if time had also stood still in the other world, and who the previous owner of the Ring of Infinity had been. Climbing out of the well, Tsuyosuke excitedly asked if there would be a new awakening test the next day. The scene shifted to a flashback from his past, where he carried his sister in his arms. She was bleeding, and heavy rain poured down around them, the city in ruins. Cars lay overturned, roads were reduced to rubble, and panicked people ran in every direction, screaming in terror. Amidst the chaos, a colossal monster loomed in the distance, the source of the devastation that had engulfed their city. Tsuyosuke's sister, weak and pale, whispered that she could no longer feel her legs. Her voice was faint, her eyes half closed, and the fragility of her condition struck him like a dagger. Tsuyosuke's eyes burned with rage, frustration, and despair as he faced the tragedy unfolding around them. As his sister asked if their parents were okay, an explosion erupted behind them, sending huge columns of dust and debris into the air. The destruction approached like a storm, threatening to consume everything in its path. Tsuyosuke trembled, paralyzed by fear, tears streaming down his face as he feared for his life, and more importantly for the life of his beloved sister. All he could do was scream for help as the storm closed in on them. In the midst of despair, a hand emerged from the shadows. A firm, protective hand that reached out to him. It was his uncle, the savior who had come to pull them back from the brink of darkness. He urged them to keep running, insisting that stopping would mean certain death, as the darkness would catch them without mercy. His uncle warned that they could not return for their parents. That path would be a one-way trip. Desperation filled Tsuyosuke's voice as he insisted that their parents were still in the city, but the only response he received was that he would never defeat the darkness alone. In that chaotic state, the giant monster continued its rampage, demolishing buildings as if they were mere paper. The scene shifted back to the present, where Tsuyosuke's sister Karina was beginning to feel a bit better. She was awake, but unable to walk, and she asked her brother if he would be taking the awakening test. He had just returned from work, and the nurse was advising Karina to take better care of herself. Tsuyosuke approached his sister, speaking gently to comfort her. Upset, she insisted that she was fine, even though she still couldn't get up on her own. She mentioned that she was used to the constant pain and her inability to walk normally. Hearing her words pierced Tsuyosuke's heart with deep sadness. He activated his scanning ability to check her health condition, and the results were grim. Her legs were almost completely and irreversibly compromised, with recovery chances bordering on impossible. He thought about everything she should have experienced: school, travel, fun, parties, and the dreams that had slipped away. The sight of her suffering left him deeply afflicted. Even with the odds stacked against her, he longed to see her stand again, even if just for a single day. He believed that if he became a hero, he might find an improbable solution to heal her. More than anything, he wanted to live a life of dignity and make a difference. With that thought in mind, he raised his hand toward the glowing moon in the sky, feeling the rain on his skin. After some time, he made his way to the Awakening Test Center, where a young man was already undergoing testing. The boy exuded confidence, his wealthy parents planning a grand celebration for his inevitable success. The tester explained the process to Tsuyosuke, instructing him to enter when he was ready. A man in a suit scoffed, doubting that Tsuyosuke's results would surpass those of the last candidate. Undeterred, Tsuyosuke entered the room with unwavering confidence and determination. The examiner warned him that if he failed the test, he would likely fail all future attempts as well. The device measured everything precisely, and the examiner had dealt with many frustrated, stubborn individuals. As Tsuyosuke walked forward with purpose, he overheard the examiner discussing the latest recorded results. The previous subject had a combat level of 3, just like the one before him. Things rarely changed much over time, and Tsuyosuke figured he might also be at level 3, but he hoped for something surprising. He placed his hand on the panel and activated the perfect physical conditioning mode, focusing intently. His entire body tensed, filled with an electrifying energy that made him vibrate. The panel's indicators exceeded the scale, and the device began to malfunction under the extreme pressure. The inspector outside noticed a tremor coming from the test room, accompanied by strange lights. With a single hand, Tsuyosuke shattered the strength recorder that had stood for 30 consecutive years. Even he couldn't believe the numbers he was generating. They were 10 times greater than the previous record. A wave of power surged through him, and a huge smile spread across his face. He wondered how much stronger he would become if he wielded the legendary Divine Hammer. A message flashed before him, warning that due to his level, he could only use one strike with the sacred weapon. Undeterred, He prepared to measure the combat power of the divine axe of the King of the Gods. Channeling the weapon's energy, his eyes shone with intensity as he concentrated the power in his hands. Soon after, he received a notification indicating that only 1 second of energy remained. Upon activating the hammer's power, all the energy drained in the blink of an eye, as if it had evaporated. He had to act quickly to measure his strength before losing control of the unstable power. With the veins in his face bulging from the exertion, a portal suddenly opened in the sky above the test center building. The presence emanating from it was so powerful that it blanketed the city in intense, shimmering, magical flows. Dragons of light flew majestically from the portal, their forms radiant and awe-inspiring. The entire test center lost power due to the unusual event, plunging the building into darkness. After a moment, a man with glasses entered the room to report the electrical failure in the system. Instead of finding a muscular hero, he was met with the sight of an exhausted Suyasuke, breathing heavily and unevenly. As he walked down the hallway, he reflected on how he had underestimated the sacred hammer. All his power had been drained in an instant. However, he took solace in the fact that he was now officially an awakened hero. Soon after, he was sent to the training area with the other newly graduated heroes, all of whom were excited and eager. The instructor, a man with white hair and shining armor adorned with huge golden shoulder plates, commanded attention as he spoke with a firm voice. Suyasuke observed the instructor's level and combat strength, feeling a pang of disappointment at the instructor's apparent frustration. The instructor preferred clearing dungeons to teaching what he deemed lazy rookies. He announced that the next morning, everyone would embark on their first dungeon for mandatory practical training. The recruits were shocked. They had only expected simple drills at the beginning of their training. With a serious expression, the instructor explained that this was to develop their real and latent abilities. He warned that the training would be hard, and anyone unprepared could quit right away. Suyasuke felt the weight of the instructor's frustration, fully understanding the suffocating pressure that came with such expectations. Despite the daunting challenge ahead, Suyasuke knew that something greater awaited him in another world of possibilities. A beast girl of level 72 was waiting for him, and that thought filled him with joy. After the initial instructions, he returned home, feeling that the time to depart had finally come. The ring shone brightly, opening the portal to the beast people's world he had come to know. Once again, he found himself gazing at the bright moon, missing the familiar environment. He sat on a dune, breathing in the fresh air and observing the desert landscape with care. He noticed that the transition hadn't changed anything. His clothes or gear remained the same. Soon, the beast girl appeared, asking if something had happened or if everything was okay. A bit shy, he replied that everything was fine, his cheeks slightly flushed. She smiled at his response and informed him that not far from there was a band of dangerous goblins. These goblins were level 3, and she warned him of the danger of underestimating them in direct combat. Suyasuke smiled upon hearing that, considering them his first real targets. They moved toward the goblin camp, staying silent to avoid alarming the monsters. Suyasuke commented that, being level 72, she could defeat them with absolute ease. She was surprised, having never revealed her level to him before. He expressed his desire to observe how high-level warriors fought so he could learn from them. She explained that if she helped him, he wouldn't gain experience due to the massive level gap. Though frustrated, he understood, and she urged him to watch closely and learn carefully. With a fierce gaze, she charged at the goblins, her dagger glowing with magical energy. In one quick and precise strike, she cut down several of them at once, showcasing her impressive mastery. Unable to contain his excitement, Suyasuke leaped from the bushes, clapping like an amazed child. She turned to him, her eyes sparkling with joy at his genuine praise. She mentioned that she always gave her best, even against weak and disorganized opponents, and spoke about her special skill meant for high-level, well-trained warriors. Suyasuke promised that one day he would become a warrior worthy of her and her world. Thanks to the divine system, he knew he could copy skills from others, and he was determined to grow stronger alongside her. Regardless of class, the girl blushed and quickly apologized, worried he had chosen the warrior path solely because of her. She took his hand gently, reminding him he must choose both his tools and destiny carefully. The protagonist felt warmth at being reunited with his steadfast companion. Suddenly, a shout pierced the air. More goblins were approaching in battle formation. Without hesitation, he requested a dagger and declared he would handle the two enemies descending the trail alone. Though his companion warned of the danger, he'd already assumed his combat stance. Channeling magical energy into the blade, he launched himself at the goblins with his Sky Shake skill. A tremendous explosion followed, leaving the girl wide-eyed with excitement. The battle proved easier than anticipated, and he found himself growing fond of the divine selection system.